So, hey guys, today we're going to be talking about hand traps and how they've recently moderately improved. There were several issues with hand traps, and there are still going to be several more that we're not going to be talking about in this video specifically. But some of these issues include the fact that, well, let's start with you're all running kind of the same hand traps and they all do the same kind of thing, so it ends up staling the game a bit. So let's go with, for example, Nibiru. So this card probably pretty infamous for a lot of moderately older players now, since Nibiru hasn't been played in a while, but it wasn't that long ago. Only, I don't know, how many years? Like maybe three-ish or so? 3 years, 2 years, something like that. When Nibiru would have been like reasonably good. The only reason you don't like want to overdo it with Nibiru sometimes is just simply because you're going first. And when you're going first, you don't want to see Nibiru versus like Ash Blossom, and Ash Blossom is in general going to be better than Nib. So with the older decks, you just didn't have good follow-up most of the time. So if you end up board wiping your opponent on turn 2, you're board wiping yourself, and then you need to draw a combo again in general. You're actually in disadvantage a little bit after Nibiru, technically, because if you've fully done your combo going first, then you're down starters and just engine versus your opponent, who's probably up a bit more engine because they only got like halfway through a combo. But yeah, basically every single time you would do a combo, you have to consider, okay, but how does it play into Nibiru? And do I just fully commit and send, despite knowing that my opponent could nib me for my life savings, and there's absolutely nothing I could do at any point in this combo to deal with Nibiru? And in fact, there were only just a handful of cards that would help you beat Nibiru. The most notable one is just cross out for nib. So you're trying to deal with at most a 30% chance of your opponent hard opening Nibiru with your own hard opened cross out designator to match, which also requires you to play Nibiru, which you may or may not want to play depending on your exact deck. Like, I don't know, let's say I'm playing, well, we'll just say Kishtira, right? Kishtira technically has like kind of lines against Nib, so that's something. But if I give myself the Nibiru, the Primal Being, I just lock myself out of playing my deck, basically. So yeah, that's awful, isn't it? All right. So yeah, if I have to play like Crossout and Nib together, pretty awful. Same idea with like Dimension Shifter. So Dimension Shifter is like a card that used to be kind of like goodn't. So the thing with Shifter was, if I run Shifter, then there are multiple conditionals to Shifter that make it kind of bad. So step 1, I am under Shifter, which already eliminates just a majority of decks, because a majority of decks can not play under Shifter at all. So playing Shifter essentially just sucks balls. Yeah, because there's no benefit. It kind of works well depending on exactly when it was played, right? It kind of just worked closer to something like a Waboku. So it was like mutual, and both players just couldn't play under Shifter typically. The only deck that could play under Shifter that I remember was like this one Danger deck, because Dangers, when they're discarded, they can still be special summoned and trigger their effects. So they work under Shifter, and you use these guys to OTK by making like a big Numeron Dragon or something. And you also play a bunch of board breakers or something like that, from what I remember. But what these cards kind of have in common here that's really annoying is that you have to cross out these cards if you're playing them, right? So it wasn't that bad on these cards, because these cards were like slightly more situational than what I would call the usually always good kind of hand traps, like Ash Blossom, Maxi, Ghost Spell's like moderately decent, but usually like Imperm and Veiler are cards you want to cross out, I guess. And there's some cases where you even want to cross out your opponent's crossouts just so they can't um cross out your thing. So the counter to cross out was cross out, and then the counter to like Ash Blossom and technically Maxi as well would be that you have like 1 called by, 3 cross out, and then 3 Ash Blossom Joe Spring. So Maxi basically never resolves. So that's kind of how the older format worked. I guess limiting like crossout and Maxi does have the benefit of like even assuming you want to play Maxi or whatever, you don't have to play as many cards to deal with Maxi now because you know you can't because they limited them. But yeah, so another issue with like hand traps in general is the best hand traps are hand traps that you just can't deal with at all. So if we take away crossout designator, because we just went through like a few of the issues with crossout, so let's just pretend for a second, but this isn't really going to be the case. But imperm, you can't cross out imperm because you're not playing like imperm, right? So what do you have to counter infinite impermanence? Absolutely hot nothing. Like you can't Ash imperm, you can't Veiler imperm, you can't like Bistral imperm, you can't even like called by imperm, right? So that made imperm like super strong and became kind of problematic to the point where we started more or less getting cards that were just designed to like more or less dodge the imperm. So like with Unchained, you have Unchained Soul of Sharvara. So if you target any part of my combo, I'll just blow it up and move on with life because your imperm did not connect. And I just more or less full combo anyways. Another deck that did this was like Fire King, and more recently we have Fallen and the Virtuous to kind of do the same thing to moderately play around imperm. It's not as though like imperm is legitimately useless though, because there's still the idea of just hard reading. Like if my opponent is going to be playing Fire King now, I can just say they could be playing like Fallen and Virtuous, and they might also have the Kirin in hand. So holding this is pretty reasonable because it's like a 50-50 if they have any copies of cards that kind of like dodge the imperm. So I can just hold onto the imperm here and just use it on, I don't know, like let's say they have an SP on their end board next turn. I can just imperm the SP or IP for SP, and we're going to be able to just hold the imperm for next turn, right? But you could also risk it all and just try to blast the imperm, like head empty, no thoughts, press the glowing button, right? I mean, there's payoff for both and like risk assessment for both. Like maybe you can't actually handle their end board and you already know what they're going to end on. So you just have to blast the imperm because there's no top deck that allows you to beat their end board. Even if you do use like a imperm, maybe there is and it's worth holding. So you have to like account for those as well. If you account for like I guess hand traps, I guess that math kind of changes a little bit. Like if you predict them to have 1 or 2 hand traps as well as the end board, and then you add the end board to the hand. But yeah, that's like a different thing almost. So cross out kind of becomes like a little bit of sacky nonsense for like a billion reasons, and that doesn't even account for how oppressive it is in mirrors. So conceptually, if I'm playing a mirror, let's say I have I don't know, I've gone through my whole end board, or no, I've went through my whole combo and set up my end board, so I don't have any like main deck pieces on the field, or I don't need to interact with them anymore. So in this case then, if my opponent is then playing Phantom Knights and I'm also playing let's say Phantom Knights, I can like cross out Thorn Scales, I can cross out like just whatever, and my opponent could just not play the game. Like for example, if we were doing like a branded mirror and I just cross out branded fusion and then my opponent just can't result branded fusion, it's pretty much more or less the same as Ash Blossom just bringing branded fusion, but it's like dumber. I'd argue. Well, I mean, it's not like genuinely that bad unless there are 3 crossout, in which case it's completely awful and terrible. If it's just the one of it's like moderately annoying versus the pain of when crossouts at 3, because then okay, if they have crossout on brand fusion, now you have to crossout, and that's your counterplay to that. Yeah, that's dumb, isn't it? But yeah. So now that we have the well, we'll move on to the next topic, I guess. So now that we have the newer hand traps, though, one of the big benefits to all of these Dominus cards, well, as per usual, like similarly to Infinite Impermanence, you can just activate these from your hand, or you can set them. There is kind of a penalty for using these guys from hand, which I like a lot actually, because that means, well, partially that you have to be a little bit more thoughtful with how you use these cards. I mean, I don't know if this is really good for new players, but yeah, I think you have to deal with the old players before you deal with the new, somewhat. But yeah, that's just my opinion right there. But with Dominus Impulse, you cannot activate Light Earth Wind. With Purge, you cannot activate Dark Water Fire. I mean, I still dislike the fact that these cards are raw negates, right? But there's a bunch of perks with the Dominus cards in general, and it's helpful now that we have more of them. When we only had the 2, so like Impulse and Purge, I really didn't appreciate them that much because, well, they don't really accomplish that much when we just add only these guys with our whole hand pool. So same thing with Bistrels, honestly. Like Bistrels are a lot more fine now, but like on release they were just completely dumb and just like a complete death sentence to like every light and dark deck ever, with the exception of maybe like Exosisters exactly. Although like Exosisters weren't that happy with dealing with this either. In theory, end phase you end on like Magnifica. You can Bestial Magnuma, banish a card, nothing triggers, or Druid's Worm. Either way, you can force some interaction with that, and that's a relatively neutral matchup, basically, right? Technically, you could even do Magnuma add like Druid's Worm in the end phase, and then banish one of the Exosister monsters that I think might be in the graveyard as well. And then you just have 2 bodies to kind of just try to run into the XYZ monster a bit there. You can definitely do that, I guess, but yeah. So back to the Dominus cards. Well, first off, one of the good things with the Dominus cards is that they're not fully generic, so you won't see them being run in every deck. Like, for example, Droll. You guys like maybe remember that one period in time where around Super Heavy Samurai, just every single deck being played at that point was very, very susceptible to Droll. So everyone was just playing Droll and getting Drolled, and that was honestly just completely miserable, because the game hinged on basically a Droll minigame, which I think is much worse than like the idea of Maxi, because Droll just completely stopped gameplay. Whereas Maxi, there is still actually the option to continue. So yeah, it's just worse in general, right? And part of the problem, I'd say, is that every deck can just generically play Droll, and Droll has no like activation conditions or anything like that. You can just, well, I mean, it kind of has one, but it's not really a big deal when every deck at that point in time searched like 6+ times. So yeah, it basically just completely blew, you know, it just sucked. And you would just get completely Drolled, and then you would lose the game because you don't really have much counterplay to Droll. So in terms of counterplay to Droll specifically, you have to hard open either Crossout or like Pulled by the Grave. That were, I suppose, like there weren't that many decks that could do it at the time, but you could drop an immediate negate on the field, and then you'd be able to negate Droll, which just wasn't a thing at that time, so I wouldn't really count that. So the outs that people had for it were just essentially Crossout called by. But now, because well, we aren't fully finished with all of the new hand traps that we're going to be getting probably, right? So with all of these Dominus cards, like I do prefer the ones that don't just raw negate, because when you just do a negate, it basically kind of progresses towards stopping the game and not so much towards progressing the game, I'd say. So like with Draco Tail 5 mana, which is kind of a hand trap as well, that will usually set you a follow up for the next turn, and also be an interruption and not so much like a full stop. So ideas of something like if you result branded fusion, imperm on Albion will still allow like the branded player to still play and get into Mirror Jade, because you usually send like Lubellion and Fallen of Albaz when you special summon the Albion, and then I think you, with this particular combo, you need like a Dark monster in graveyard or something, because you don't want to banish the Lubellion, or not Lubellion, the the Lubellion in the graveyard, and I believe the Albion on field. You don't really want to get rid of those guys, so you want to banish a Dark plus Fallen of Albaz to make the other Lubellion, the Fusion Lubellion, and then Fusion Lubellion is going to shuffle itself back with Fallen of Albaz to make Mirror Jade, and then Tribute Albion. If not, you have Tribute Albion, and then end phase trigger Albion for Branded in Red. Branded in Red adds you Fallen of Albaz, and you infuse it with what was it? The Light Monster Lubellion, I think. Was that what it was? And then you trigger like Branded Lost effect to add Courier plus still end on a Mirror Jade, I'm pretty sure, right? Because you just summon like Albion or Lubellion or something the next turn. Yeah, something along those lines, right? So okay. The Dominus cards having being like imperm like gives one of the benefits of, I suppose that this is a very small benefit, but you won't need to play Crossout or Called By technically for these cards, which is kind of nice in a way, because you have extra room in your deck to just put in whatever cards you like. I mean, it's like 2 cards, but cards are cards. So the idea here is that you can't really consistently cross out Dominus cards. So let's say I play Dominus Impulse, I'm not going to be able to really reasonably cross out Purge, and there's no real other counterplay in my deck. So you just have to account for the Dominus cards and you just have to tank them, right? That's kind of how it goes with all of them. That, or you just don't play at all, I guess, into them. They're ideas for kind of like, just both of these ideas, right? I suppose there's also the fact that the Dominus cards are not actually that insanely oppressive. I mean, Purge is literally just like Ash Blossom Joe Spring, pretty much. But actually, no, this is worse than Ash Blossom Joe Spring, now that I think about it. Because if you special summon from deck or perform a special summon, Foolish Burial, Dominus Purge actually does hard nothing. So for example, if I'm playing like Tearlament, I don't think you can really purge anything. Yeah, you can't really purge anything except for Kick Kelos effect to add / Foolish Burial. I think that's the only meaningful point in time where you could purge, but that effect actually can get chain blocked depending on like how it resolves. It's actually not very hard to chain block it at all. If we're just considering like full power tier limit, but no like millers. It's still like decent odds to resolve. Even worse with accounting for millers, of course. But yeah, I mean, the downside for Songs of the Dominators makes it that only specific decks can play this. So the downside for this is you cannot activate the effects of monsters in your hand, graveyard, and banishment until the end of the next turn. So, for example, Exosister can't play this because you need to activate like Martha in hand. You can't play this with. Well, I mean, you could technically play this with Kashtira, but that will lock you out of Scareclaw Cache and Tier Cache hand effects. You have no other effects, so Songs of Dominators is probably okay to play in something like a Kashtira. I mean, in Tearlament, you need the graveyard and hand, both. So you want to activate like Shirin, Abnus, Merly technically in the graveyard as well, if they're there. No, you can still activate your like spells and traps in the graveyard, I guess, which is something. And then for Dominus Spiral, I think these cards like Spark and Spiral are going to be a little bit more interesting. Target one monster your opponent controls, return it to the hand / extra deck. Then if you have no traps in your graveyard, your opponent can special summon one monster from the graveyard. So it gives your opponent a possibility to extend here, which is kind of neat. But if you also have a trap, then they don't really have this. So a little bit of variance there that I think is a little bit interesting. Dominus Spark. Target one monster your opponent controls, banish it. Then if you have no traps in your graveyard, your opponent can special summon one monster from their hand. If you activate this card from your hand, you cannot activate the effects of Earth, Water, Fire, and Wind monsters for the rest of this duel. And this says during the turn in which your opponent has activated a monster effect in either the hand or graveyard, you can activate this card from your hand. So I like Dominus Spark a lot actually, because this actually does give your opponent a chance to play around this, because there's certain decks and certain combos that can play around Dominus Spark. So for example, like Kashtira, you never have to activate like Tier Cache or anything like that. So that's great. And technically this can be used as like a board breaker as well. So if my opponent hand traps me, like assuming they are playing some deck that doesn't activate like any card effects that are listed here, right? So from hand or graveyard, but they still run hand traps. If they were to drop a non-Dominus like hand trap on me during turn 2, I have the option to then use Dominus Spark later. There's like a little bit of a caveat, but this one probably doesn't matter in this case, where your opponent can special summon a monster from the hand, because 99% of the time nowadays, so it's not actually 99, it's closer to like straight up 90, but the majority of monsters are not going to be interruptions. When it comes to like main deck monsters, they're purely just like to get into the extra deck monsters for the most part. I guess the exceptions to this right now, the closest ones, but still only kind of, are going to be it'll be specifically like Draco Tail and Cool Tune, where if they use their guys as like synchro material, they will trigger and then be able to do things, but also they don't really have effects to quick synchro or anything, or additionally really fusion summon with Spark. So it doesn't really affect anything, even if they do get to summon like a Cool Tune or Draco Tail monster the majority of the time. There's like one exception, and I believe probably Draco Tail. With a Cool Tune, they can synchro from hand anyways. So it's, yeah, that doesn't really change much, does it? But with specifically like Draco Tail, I think it was like Ilulu or whatever that has the effect of fusion summon. And if they play like branded stuff, which isn't Draco Tail stuff, they could summon a Kartika that was in the graveyard or something that went back to the hand, and that's like public info. But yeah, if your opponent tries to hand trap you, turn 2, like with like an Ash Blossom or something, Dominus Spark becomes live. So that's kind of neat, right? And not every single deck can play Dominus Spark, not everyone can play like Spiral, and yada yada. The only deck that would play all of these would be like a pure control deck, kind of. And would that even be that good? Well, there's going to be like a trade-off. The only card that builds advantage is Songs of the Dominators, and you cannot search this, can you? Oh, never mind, you can search this. But it doesn't really help, because that only restocks itself, right? So you can add Songs of the Dominators with Songs of the Dominators, apparently. But even then, you're only able to add this card twice, right? And then I guess after you add this card twice, you can add a third card, but you're not really building advantage like with typical end boards. So like if I summon DPE, I get to cycle DPE a billion times and I can do other things uh, just over the course of the duel. So let's say I have DPE for 5 turns, I can still do other things and put other end board pieces. Like with the DPE, I can then have a Dragoon that I summon on the later follow-up turn with maybe, I don't know, let's say Verte. But again, because I maintained my Verte. So I can get continuously more and more interruptions, but like with these, you only have the one Dominus card, and it's mostly one and done. So I guess that's how the Dominus cards work. And it's just going to be better for the game long term if we're not playing like all of the same hand traps in every single deck. So, you know, at some point, like some people, I think a lot of people actually complain that like Typhon is like terrible, but you have to consider like Typhon in every situation where you summon Typhon, you're actually better off with Typhon than without. And because it's not like literally game changing enough, you aren't forced into playing Typhon, which is actually a good thing, right? So like the concept with Maxi of how good Maxi is, where a lot of people were like super pressured into playing it. Like honestly, you still didn't have to play Maxi in my opinion, because there were other like viable options to play, right? And there were like actually reasons not to play Maxi, like considering everyone knows Maxi exists, right? Maxi isn't a surprise. You would prepare for Maxi, but you're not going to be prepared for like, let's say, Cyframe Gear Gamma. So arguably, instead of Maxi, at one point in time, you were better off running like 2 Gamma plus 1 Driver. I would argue, right? Simply because you have to consider like your opponent has like 3 some Joy Spring, 3 Cross F Designator, and then 2 Called by the Grave. I just remembered Called by the Grave wasn't always limited. So the odds of your Maxi resolving and opening Maxi, that's like 1 in 3 for both. So not looking like really good in terms of the odds on this one. So I'm feeling like maybe 1 in 9 games you'll have Maxi resolve, but in the 1 out of 3 games you get Gamma, it'll pretty much always resolve, right? Well, depending on what deck you're playing exactly, because they're really good baits for Gamma. So with Typhon, right? Because it has like the restrictions on it, it's not going to be that insanely broken, which is a good thing. But it's also not always able to be summoned. So, for example, with Dracotail, they can end on a board where they only summon just one time, and this comes up like decent amount of the time actually, where they just make Arthalion, and it kind of just pass from there. I think it's something like, I don't know, Ketu effect, and then you like Rahu or something. I don't remember exactly what happens, but yeah, they only end up summoning like once. They just summon the Arthalion, and then they just pass. I don't remember the exact context for this one actually, but yeah, that ends up happening a good amount of the time, and then Typhon not really useful. But also they have a bunch of like back row and such. So noticeably, I guess Horn is an annoying one. So they can just born back your Typhon if it's in attack position, but you lose a lot of mileage from the Typhon if you can't have it run over something by battle. So not really super insane mileage on like a Typhon, right? But it's still beneficial to have the Typhon at least, but you don't need to run it. So that's pretty neat. And then if we have take a look at this card, pretty cool as well. So I like Harmonia a lot actually. So this card has an insane amount of just random mileage. So this can be used as technically a board breaker as well. So if you just draw into this turn 2, it's not actually that bad. But yeah, when a monster your opponent controls activates its effect, quick effect, you can reveal this card in your hand and up to 5 synchro monsters in your extra deck. Apply all of these effects in sequence based on the number revealed. Also, you cannot activate the effects of monsters special summon from the extra deck until the end of your next turn after this effect resolves, except for synchro monsters. So with this, you have special summon this card. So it's just additionally a body. Send one revealed synchro monster to the graveyard. So this synchro monster, it could be an interruption or it can be potentially follow up, depending on the exact deck you're playing. So with the idea of if you're playing, I guess it would be something like a Centurion, I believe. If you send let's see, what was the name of this card again? Despian Lulu Walilith? Despian Lulu Walilith, yeah. During the end phase, if this card is in the graveyard because it was sent there this turn, you can special summon a light soulcaster monster from your hand or deck whose attack equals its own defense. We could do this, right? Send this with Harmonia, and then we can use its effect to pop here, destroy one monster your opponent controls, so we can get a body of Hydraulis Harmonia here, and then we can have Lulu Walilith search us follow-up. So it's not purely just interruption, but it's a little bit more nuanced and gives you more options. And in like Yu-Gi-Oh, like a little while ago, not even that long ago, honestly, you don't really have options, right? So like let's take a small branded example, right? So there are probably better examples of this, but here's an idea, right? My opponent is playing branded, and I know essentially their deck, it just comes down to resolve branded fusion, right? So if normal summon a looper, I don't care. They're just searching branded fusion. Even if they search branded loss, I can ash branded fusion still. Don't care about any of this. So basically, I'm just waiting for branded fusion to resolve, and I just drop the ash blossom on it. And if they have called by the grave, it never mattered when I ash. So yeah, absolutely nothing I could really do. So if I hold ash for branded fusion, it either resolves or it doesn't, and that's what it just comes down to, is if they have called by the grave or cross out or whatever for ash blossom Joe swing. So if they have it, then I'll probably, let's say I'll probably lose based on like what my hand has. Maybe I can only tank like, I don't know, let's say 2 interruptions or so, and then I can go into something like not necessarily full combo, just I'm able to do something and maybe win the game, maybe OTK, who knows. But if they resolve branded fusion, accounting for like their hand traps that they're going to have alongside like whatever engine, I can only play around maybe their hand traps. So if they get into their engine, I'll lose. Essentially, that's the idea. So with hand traps becoming more nuanced, this also helps with the issue of like, well, if we get like essentially 2 effect hand traps, so that'd be like Harmonia, Fistules, those types of hand traps have like extraordinary mileage because like with Magnemite, for example, it's not always going to come up because Magnemite is actually a bit more situational than Harmonia, I would argue. If I special summon Magnemite, I can then grab Lubellion, and then Lubellion grabs me like Druid's Worm, and then I can bash a card. So this is 1 bash, 2 bashes, and then this has the effect to send a special summon card to the graveyard. So that's actually like the 3rd effect from just the Magnemite, and then technically I can bring back Lubellion as well to then set Regained, which can then reborn Magnemite, and then this can add back at least the Druid Worm. Depending on if my opponent like special summon something, right? That word could add back like another Bestial, like I don't know, Baldrake or Serenir. Why does Baldrake not show up here actually? But yeah, you can then resolve your Bestial effect again for yet another banish. So assuming every single banish is actually going to be a meaningful interruption, like maybe you're playing against, I don't know, let's say Orcust, where the banishes do matter. That's bash 1, 2, 3, and also send. So that's 4 interruptions here, more or less. And that will be by the end of like turn 2. That's how much mileage you would get. And yeah, that's kind of the idea here, right? Because, well, with engine in general, so we can go with like Branded again. So if we activate like a single card, so that could be like Branded Fusion, a Luber, or like a Cool 2 normal summon, you would get like I don't know the exact amount of interruption. We'll just drop a number and say maybe you get 6 interruption from your combo, or 6 or above. So if your one hand card trades for like my entire hand, essentially. So assuming I have no hand traps and your combo fully resolves, and I just have to play with maybe engine. If my engine or hand traps like they just don't have enough mileage to deal with like your engine, then I'm just in an immediately unplayable kind of disadvantage almost, and that makes the game somewhat terrible in all those regards as well. But I mean, with like Harmonia and stuff, like there's some hope for the hand traps in this game actually. Like they're a lot better than just the one note ideas with like Ash Blossom Joy Spring and how you play around these cards, right? So how you play around Ash Blossom Joy Spring is essentially like the idea is like you have Called by the Grave in hand, or you've crossed out. So yeah, part of the reason this sucks, I guess, is that you have the option to do this, right? Where they give you kind of the option to play like Called by Crossout, but with the Dominus cards, you don't have this option at all. So you actually have to figure something out for those cards, which is a little bit more interesting, at least. Maybe from like a game design balance standpoint, that might not be good because maybe in some cases you're utterly hopeless and can't do anything against the Dominus cards. But I don't know. Let's just throw in like a fun little random example of something you could do. Like I'm not saying this is going to be consistent, but I don't know. Let's say I just play Jinzo, okay? And here's my combo line. Let's go Diabell Star. Special summon Diabell Star. I'm going to set Deception. Deception is going to tribute over Diabell Star, right? Except we're not going to do that yet. We're just going to activate Deception, and we're going to tribute over, or not tribute over the Diabell Star. We're going to banish the Diabell Star for Dark Magician of Destruction. And then we're going to add something. I don't really care what you add off of this. There are like several little ideas you could add, like Magician's Rod, sending Diabell Star, and then sending some spells or traps or whatever later. But Dark Magician of Destruction, and then we can tribute over this, grabs Hallowed Azamina. Hallowed Azamina then summons, we'll say, Ricielago, and then at this point, Ricielago is going to add something, and I'll just normal summon on top of this with Jinzo. Yeah. I'll just normal summon Jinzo, and then we can just use like the effect to return, and then summon like, I don't know, Ilia Sylvia. And this would allow me to play around like the majority of the Dominus cards with this kind of idea. You probably could, well, it depends. I don't know exactly when would be optimal to summon like the Jinzo, but even if you do it a little bit earlier, it's still about the same idea. Depends if you like how many bodies you have and whatnot, what hand cards you have, I guess. But yeah, if I normal summon Jinzo, this just cancels out every single one of the trap cards my opponent could be playing. So, yeah, that's an idea, I guess, to play around the Dominus cards. And then if my opponent has any other additional hand traps after this point, I still have potentially the idea of just summoning like Lilia Sylvia, because there's still like the graveyard effect of Hallowed Azamina. And then assuming my actual engine that I'm playing, so assuming these are kind of like supplementary stuff and not my main like engine, then assuming my main engine requires me to just special summon something and then go into combo, I can still do that afterwards, and I'm still going to be insulated from stuff. So this will protect me from Nib, and then this will protect me from like every Dominus card plus Infirm, which is pretty chill, I guess. The one downside to this specific combo is you're main decking Jinzo, and you have to hard open Jinzo. But you know, sometimes desperate times call for desperate measures, you know? So yeah, I mean, the Dominus cards, pretty chill. A lot of the newer hand traps now, kind of chill. So with Bestials, it was just like, if we only have Bestials, it's just so stupidly oppressive, because at the point in time where we had Bestials release, and for a decent while after, honestly, a lot of the good decks were still like light and dark decks, so you were just getting pretty oppressed by Bestials. And if your opponent had a Bestial, you kind of just lost the game. Moderately. It wasn't like fully guaranteed, but it was pretty bad. So yeah, that's all I got for you guys today, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Bye.